Now that we've talked about Piaget's cognitive development and how we think, then we have another one. And once again, I was telling you, when you take Psychology 101, there'll be certain things people are like, oh yeah, you learned about Piaget, you learned about this, you learned about that. Well, Ericksons is another famous one. This is one that's been around for years and it hasn't been disproven. It just keeps going on and on. So now we look at Erikson as the actual system for social development. To know how are we going to develop socially with others? How are we going to develop ourselves in a positive or maybe even a negative way based on how we interact with other people. So here we go. So what happens here is Erikson has several stages. So I'm going to give you the stage, I'm going to give you the age, and then I'm going to give you the developmental crisis. And we're going to talk just briefly about each one. So for your test, what you're going to need to know basically is what you're seeing here. Okay? So, and we've got all done on the end. We might zoom in a little more on this, but you can take notes. This is what you're going to have on Erickson's. I'm going to ask you to list all the stages. I'm going to ask you to list the ages with each stage and the developmental crisis. For example, infancy, birth to 1 year. So a baby is born, okay? What's the developmental crisis? Trust versus mistrust. Wow, you mean to tell me that when a baby's born to 1 year, it's when it's going to develop most of its trust issues? And the answer is yes. It's like, am I going to trust others or not trust others? And how does that happen? Well, when the baby cries, does somebody come? When the baby cries, does somebody come? When the baby has needs, are those needs met? Now, I'm going to tell you something really cool. I'm going to tell you something really cool, okay? First of all, you have all these things that happen, okay? But this is one of the coolest things in the world, okay? I kind of think God gave us this because down here in this adolescent role, your brain goes through an interesting development. In the teens, 20s, where it's identity versus role confusion, we'll talk about this a little bit later. This is an amazing time, okay? And then as you enter into early adulthood, but by the time you're 21 or 22, there's a period of time in here from about 18 or 19 to about 20 or 21 where you can actually change things. You can actually take your brain and kind of reprogram yourself. It's amazing. And it's a real neat reset so that if you had little things happen back in here that didn't turn out good, you actually have a reset. So if you don't trust people because as a baby you weren't taken care of, then you actually have a reset, and you can actually change that mindset in your own mind. In your own mind, you can go back and say, okay, yes, I do trust, or yes, no, I don't trust. So interesting. We'll talk about that here a little bit. Okay, so infancy, trust versus mistrust. That's the issue. That is the only social issue that a birth to 1 year baby is having is, do I trust this person or do I not trust this person? Wow. And you're like, well, there's so much more going on in my baby. You know, you're like, well, I just, maybe a mom out there and or you may have a little nephew or niece and they're smiling and stuff. And that's good because smiling and happy is trust and sad is mistrust. So then we go into toddler. Now in toddler, it's 1 to 2 years old, okay? Now, this is pretty amazing because this is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now, autonomy, auto means self. It means, can I do it myself? So, once again, you mean to tell me that 1 to 2 years old, we should be letting that little toddler help us? The answer is yes. A 1 to 2 year old is like, oh, good job, way to go. We give them, a little 2-year-old, they want to do something all the time. You're like, man, that's a little kid. But autonomy versus shame and doubt, what can they do? What can they do? And you say, well, I don't get this. But watch a 1-year-old. As they begin to walk, what happens? Or they begin to crawl, what happens? Everybody's like, yeah, way to go! And that little kid then, right away, has autonomy. I am capable of doing something. Wow, look what I can do. I remember my oldest daughter, Brittany, she was about 1.5 years old, and I think she was, there was a little bitty brick, and there was a fireplace, a little ledge, and we were at Christmas. And my parents were there, and my wife's parents were there, and the whole family was there. And Brittany, just out of the blue, she'd already been walking, she stepped up on the step, and she stood there, and she kind of surprised herself that she didn't fall backwards, and everybody went, yeah, Brittany, yeah! So she stepped down, and then she stepped up, and everybody went, yay! And she looked around, and she got all puffed up. Well, and that would have been okay if she hadn't done it 20 more times. Okay, so, but what happens is they just all of a sudden realize autonomy. So little things. So every time your toddler, every time, hopefully somebody did that for you, 1 to 2 years old, they're finding this. So what does it mean if we don't get this? Okay, autonomy versus shame or doubt. The shame or doubt is exactly that you don't feel like you can do anything. You don't feel like you can go and explore new areas and that you can do things. As a matter of fact, you have a lot of doubt. You doubt yourself constantly. And when you doubt yourself, then you develop something called shame. Now, we define shame in a lot of different ways, but what we're talking about here, shame means you're discouraged and you don't see yourself as productive. That's shame. You don't see yourself as productive. So autonomy versus shame and doubt, toddler 1 to 2 years old. Then we get to preschool 3 to 5 years old, okay? And this is initiative versus guilt. Wow. So in today's generation, we've got a lot of parents be like, man, you know what? I'm just gonna let my kids grow up. I'm gonna let them be a kid. I'm not gonna make them do anything. I'm not gonna give them any responsibility. I'm gonna just let them be a kid. We don't let them be a kid now. Well, that may be true. But the problem is we've got some key things that happen in your development that you need to be a well-adjusted adult later. And one of them is this right here. So in preschool age, 3 to 5 years old, now we say preschool, but you're going to have this at home too. That's just the age. So it's initiative. What can we give you, okay, now not that you can just do by yourself, but that you can be in charge of. Wow. You're like, 3 to 5 years old? Well, man, if I let my kid be in charge of that, then man, it would never get done. Well, it doesn't say on here that they're going to be responsible. It says you're going to give them initiative. Okay? So it's kind of like when I was probably when I was younger. Oh, I was going to tell you too, it's kind of interesting. Do you know your first memories are at 3? Your brain is not capable of having memories before 3 years old. And you're like, oh no, I remember this or I remember that. No, somebody probably told you, or you used closure to fill it in, or you had pictures, but the brain is not capable of memories before 3 years old. So now you begin to remember, okay? So initiative. So what do we do in preschool? Okay, all right, so everybody's got to have a job, right? So here's the kindergarten teacher. Okay, all right, who's going to go get the milk today? Okay, all right, you, and you. Now that's a big job. Now you're gonna have to go get the milk, and you're gonna have to, so whenever it's time for milk break, these 3 go, and one of them gets the chocolate milk, and one of them gets the white milk, and then one gets the spoiled milk. No, we better go with strawberry. Okay, so then they go, and they all come back with spoiled milk. No, all right, so they all have a job. So then the teacher's kind of trying to come up with a million jobs. Okay, who's gonna erase the board at the end of the day? Who's gonna do this? Who's gonna do that? Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be the leader today? Who's going to be in front of the line? So initiative. Who's going to be in charge of something? So right away, if you're watching this, maybe you've got a 3 to 5 year old child right now, or maybe you've got a relative, a niece, a nephew. You go over and you say to them, you say, hey,